The content of today's video is mainly for my semester 3 students. In the paper on American literature, you have Faulkner's Dry September. This is the second assignment that I'll be doing with you all. The first assignment was Bradstreet's Prologue. While discussing Bradstreet, I've spoken about American history from the time of Columbus's discovery till the time of Quakers' arrival into America, which was necessary to understand the concerned text. The position of women in the Puritan American society is an important context for the poem. Now, in a similar vein, when we are talking about Faulkner, an idea of slavery, racism, and the conflicting position of American North consisting of states like Ohio, New Jersey, New York, and American South consisting of states like Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi is necessary. So we will follow the usual drill, that is, we will try to know the related history which will help us to understand the text better. So let's begin with no further introduction. The Puritan regime in America was over by 1740. After the end of the regime, the most important historical event was the American War of Independence, which began in the year 1775. America was then a colony of Britain, and the sudden upheaval was an account of the Americans' objection to Parliament's taxation and lack of colonial representation. But slowly the revolution changed its form, and from a colonial war stage it was transforming more into a civil war. The internal politics and social dynamics were changing. In this context, I'd like to refer to certain incidents. In 1775, Lord Dunmore, Royal Governor of Virginia, issued a proclamation promising freedom to any rebel-owned slave willing to take the British side. In 1779, Sir Henry Clinton made a similar proclamation, and a regiment of black pioneers was organized. But 4th July 1776, the day when Congress published the declaration which was read by George Washington on 9th July to the troops, can be considered as the marker of this transformation. Thus, the war was since then also between the Loyalists and the Patriots. Some of the natives, as for instance those of Quebec, were leaning towards the British. After the victory of the Patriots in the war between 1782 to 1783, free black Loyalists evacuated and settled in Nova Scotia, whereas others went to England and Caribbean. So now, if we assess the results of the American War of Independence, what can be said is certain changes were evident. With the end of an age of monarchy, civil liberties were regained. America was no longer a colony, and so social hierarchy was abolished. But what still lingered as a problem in the American society was slavery, though the dynamics were not the same. Slavery after the American War of Independence became a socio-political issue. As an aftermath, the scenario of newly liberated America was changing. In the year 1804, the northern states of America outlawed slavery, and in the year 1808, Thomas Jefferson's Act prohibiting importation of slaves went into effect. Now, this resulted in a growing discontent in the American South because the South defended slavery as a positive good. This new rationale of enslavement as a positive good was first expressed by Robert Walsh in 1819. He writes, "The physical condition of the American Negro is on the whole not comparatively alone but positively good, and he is exempt from those racking anxieties, the exacerbations of despair to which the English manufacturer and peasant are subject to in the pursuit of their pittance." Thus, many pro-slavery activists within the Southern intelligentsia and political community took the position that they, in defending slavery, were upholding the great principles which our fathers bequeathed us. They regarded the practice of holding other humans in chattel bondage as a constitutional freedom that was enshrined in the US Constitution. As a result of this, what happened is tensions grew between the northern and the southern states, and then in 1850, the newly rich cotton-growing South was threatening to secede from the Union. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln won election on a platform of halting the expansion of slavery, and finally in February 1861, 7 southern slave states were declared by their state governments to have seceded from the country, and the Confederate States of America was formed in rebellion against the US constitutional government. The states that remained loyal to the US were known as the Union, and finally a civil war breaks in between the Confederates and the Unionists. The war effectively ended on April 9, 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. The Confederacy collapsed. In the 13th Amendment, slavery was made illegal, which led to the freeing of enslaved black people. The nation then entered the Reconstruction era, and 3 new constitutional amendments granted the newly freed slave citizens civil rights. But hard feelings and hatred die hard. In 1866, KKK, Ku Klux Klan, an American white supremacist hate group was formed, and their primary targets were African Americans. If you read Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun, as for instance, you will find Benetha, who is an Afro-American, refer to the group as something that needs to be overcome. KKK is not in any way directly connected to Faulkner's Dry September, but my intention of speaking about this is to give you all an idea of the conflict around race that persisted even after abolishment of slavery. And this particular understanding is necessary to understand Dry September. Having spoken about the history of racial conflict in America, I'll be talking about Faulkner, the author of the short story, which will complete the circle of the background knowledge needed to understand the text. William Faulkner was born in Mississippi, that is American South. His father, Murray Faulkner, was alcoholic, reckless, was very much into horses, guns, and dogs, and failed at everything he attempted. This had a lasting effect on him and recurs in Faulkner's work in the form of weak or absent fathers modeled on Murray Faulkner. William Clark Faulkner was Faulkner's great-grandfather, who wrote The White Rose of Memphis and was a successful businessman and also Confederate hero. Faulkner narrated the story of his great-grandfather by Faulkner's grandfather, and this disparity between the past glory and the experienced hopelessness of Faulkner runs through his work as the theme of family decline. Now, firstly, the racial discourse that we get in Faulkner is because Faulkner was born in American South. Secondly, the Faulkners employed black servants, and so when he was young, they had black playmates. And finally, it said, based on circumstantial evidence, that old Colonel, the great-grandfather, had fathered a shadow family with one of his former slaves. And so in his work, we get the tragic position of black and white Americans. Moreover, Faulkner's nanny, Caroline Calibars, was African American, and his lifelong education by her is central to his novel's preoccupations with politics of sexuality and race. So by now, I do hope that you have understood the relation between the historical and the personal background. For those who had already read the text, I believe you can contextualize the same. For those who have not read, do read the text by keeping the summarized information of the video in the back of your mind. But before I end today, a last piece of information. Faulkner's stories are set in a fictional land named Yokna County, which is based upon Lafayette County. Interesting is the fact that Yokna, the name is formed of two Chickasaw words, Yokona meaning split and Pitofa meaning land. Thus, Yokona is a place of suffering, defeat, the grotesque and villainy, with a troubled heritage of slavery and war. And if you read Dry September, you can feel the place in each and every line of the story. Though the writer goes for a particular place here, Jefferson, which is again a fictional one. So to sum up, it can be said that the wounds of history, or the wounds out of history, and the history of the place to which Faulkner belongs is both the theme and a haunting in his short story. We'll discuss in the next video more about South and the literary tradition to which Dry September belongs. But for today, I end now. Thanks for joining.